Hello everyone. I'm going to tell you about. Thank you. Okay, I'm good. I'm going to tell you about Ember CLI Mirage library used for mocking development endpoints, API endpoints in development and mocking them in testing environment as well. So I'm working at Rebased, where for the last 2 years I've been working on Ember and Rails projects, and I would like you to share some of the tools. The Mirage is one of them that I'm using on daily basis. And let me start with asking you, is any of you writing any Ember applications? None. Okay, so it's are you thinking about trying it? Okay, at least someone. Then hopefully this presentation will further increase this willingness to learn Ember, because it's growing for a really nice and stable framework with a rich environment of libraries that you can use to help and speed up your development process. So today everything's about single page applications, and as we are on the JavaScript meeting, probably every one of you did some of them in React or maybe in Angular or just plain JavaScript. But there are some problems with single page applications and the development process. The first is that sometimes you don't have the backend yet. I won't talk about the single page applications that don't have any persistence layer on the server, because they are pretty simple. But with new projects, and if you are only writing front end, then most likely you won't have the access to your endpoints yet, or you work so fast and so efficient that you can do more of the UI before the server is ready. Backend API may not be stable. The response from the server, from the endpoints may change, and so you would have to change your code in your client application. And there is also the case of mocking and acceptance testing, when you want to simulate your application asking some endpoint and receiving some payload and populating database and doing whatever it needs to be done. So how it can be done in Ember? One of the ways is to use the SINON.js, which is not unique for Ember. It's just JavaScript server, which can be used for mocking endpoints in JavaScript projects and in testing. And it looks like something like that. So first you have to prepare an JSON object with the data you would like to simulate as your server response. And then you call the SINON server, mock the response, which is quite verbose. If you need something more complicated, it's like that's one of the start of the test. So you first need to declare all of that. There's a couple of lines of code, and you need to make it for any of the tests, or you can do some before each hook. But then, if you want to overwrite it, then it's writing them from beginning. So the other, but the plus is that it works in your testing environment, and you don't need any other tools. So you just have your application in its testing, and it works. Other way is to have with Ember is to use the HTTP mocks. Don't bother with reading the code, because it's just to show that it's a lot of boilerplate just to have one route mocked, the outer route in this example, and you also need to run separate Express.js server just for that, to let your application test against some endpoints. Okay, so, and this one is just for the development. So the previous one was just for the testing, this is for the development. So you would have to use two tools to mock in testing environment and your development environment. But there's the right way, at least for Ember. The pretty new library, it's started last year, and I will be talking about the newest version 0.2.2, which is pretty young still, but very well documented, and it doesn't have, since last update, they don't plan to make any breaking changes, so you can try working with it. And why it's cool? Because it allows to mock the API endpoints in your development. Which is nice because you can just create your UIs, use some, because Ember comes with the Ember data, which governs the data layer, and it makes all the requests to the servers for you. So with it, the Ember data would behave like in normal production application, try to reach the server, and through Mirage get some response. Then it also allows you to mock the endpoints in testing. So one tool for two environments. It has its own ORM, its database, so you can mimic the models that Ember has to populate this database, and you don't need to write so much boilerplate code just to say to your mocking tool what payload should be in the response from the server. It's bundled in the application, which means that you don't need to think about separate tool, you don't need to think about starting it, because if it's configured, then it will start in the development mode, and it will also start in the testing mode without any other functions to call it. And it uses the Pretender.js, which is JavaScript server as well. So if you are familiar with it, you can easily pass the configuration options through the Mirage configuration, and every option that Pretender accepts can be used here as well if you need some customization. So let's see how it actually works. Let's say that we have our application needs to display some authors. Maybe it's a blog platform, we have different authors. And we have the route authors that normally would give us some response from the server with authors array of the objects. So we, in the config.js files, where all the routes definition resident, we just need to call the get function, which takes two arguments, which is first is the URL that your application will be calling, and the second is the actual function handler that needs to return whatever your backend should return. So your only obligation is to make it the same way like what is expected from the real backend. If you will have it, that's for testing, and if not, then what you expect that probably it will be from the project's description. So this is the simple way. You can also use the namespace, which will just add it to the front of every route that is declared here, and you can have these multiple namespaces, and it works like that every definition that is under the namespace, it will use it, and if you put another namespace below, then you can have other routes in different namespace in this one file. Like you see, the get is like the HTTP get verb, so it's also for the post, delete, put, patch, so on. Okay, so as you can see, you can return anything from anything that your application expects when asking this endpoint. Like here, it's random events, or you can get some current user if you are using it to see if user is logged. Okay, but this is still quite verbose, quite boilerplate. So what can we do to make it nicer? So the top example is the previous one, but the actual one, like Mirage expects you to write it, it's just to use the schema, which is passed as for you as an argument to this handler function. And from schema is the database of the Mirage. Mirage has it in-memory database, which we'll talk about a bit later. But here, what is important that you can just call the name of your model that you want on this database, and it will return the same, provided you have it populated in the database. But it's just one line, and you will get this payload. So it could be 100 records, 1,000, whatever. Okay, so let's talk about the data layer, which was represented by the schema on this function. So like I said, Mirage has simple in-memory database, which looks similar to relationship databases, because you have the foreign keys and you can make and keep relations here. It has models to define how should your data look like. It has factories to populate and seed your database for you. And it has serializers, like because the Ember data has its serializers, so anything that comes from the server goes through the serializer, and it's transmitted into what Ember data expects from the server. Because you can have JSON API compliant serializer, you can have REST serializer, or you can have active model, which is used by the Rails backends. Okay, so models are kept under models, and the name of the file should reflect the name of your model. So that's this definition is enough to use this schema authors. There is a typo there, yeah. Authors all. At this point, it would return empty response, but it will return something. I mean, you will get the author's key and empty string, empty array of objects. If you would like to simulate it with an Ember, you would have first to create an object, pass the model name, pass the attributes, name and age here, and then send it as an author name age. And with Mirage, if you'd like to do that, you just define the post route that expects to get a schema, which is the database, and the request object. And in the request object, you have the request body, which is whatever your application sends. That would be normally something like this author name age. You just parse it as a JSON and call the schema authors, which is your model table, and create. And then it returns, because normally when you create some object in your server, you expect it to return you this same object with an ID, so we can populate your application database. So this simulates the same, exact same behavior. And it goes the same for the other HTTP verbs as well. As I said before, the models can have association. It's pretty easy to declare them. Just need to add the property on a model, which is has many here, with a key, which is the name of your association. And then, if you want to delete all of the posts that belongs to this author in your route handler, like in this delete, you just need to call author post delete. Because the Mirage in the database will keep the key, or foreign key of this relationship. As you can see, there is the dynamic segment of the route in this author/ID, and all the dynamic segments are available to you in the as a params. So you can access it through the request params ID and look for the certain author in your database. Same goes for the query params. If you'd like to look for through the name, like you are doing some search field and want to just bring back the certain records, you can use where. Okay, but all this assumes that your backend is compliant with either JSON API specification, REST, or active model. But what it's something completely different, because sometimes you don't have any influence over that. Maybe it will send its payload with some weird keys. Maybe you need to translate the keys. So yeah, it might be not weird as an death riding on Griffon over the rainbow, but it might be weird. Like expect that your backend has its all of its keys dasherized, not camel case set or not underscored, but dasherized. So it provides you with the serializer, same like the Ember data has its serializers. So you can change and modify the data that comes from the server, from your mocked server in this case, modify it somehow, and pass it to your application. Okay, so let's fake some data, because we know how to create models, we know how to retrieve from database, but we would like to populate it. So we have something to show, let's say, our client, if he wants to see the lot of data on your application, and you don't have the backend yet. We have a couple of options. Fixtures, which are just static data, and factories, which if you are familiar with some testing suites of other languages like Rails and RSpec, there are the factories to generate some test data for you. So the fixtures are pretty simple. You again do it like with any other files, that the name of the file is similar. It needs to be your model name. So it's just either array of the objects, or or it can be objects with the relationships. So the author ID key is here. And then if you want to load this data, you have the default scenarios, which are describe how the data are loaded in your development. That's only for the development at this point. And you just need to call the server, loads fixtures, and your Mirage database will be populated with all the fixtures that you have defined here, and they are accessible to your application. So any call against these defined routes will effectively returning this data. But that was inflexible and again a bit boilerplate. What we can do with it? We can use factories. Factories are just they produce instances of your models for you, and you can define the defaults, so you don't need to pass it each time you want to create a new object. You can also each factory gets the sequence number, so you can make your properties unique. Like in this example, it's author and the next number. So and then by calling server create list, pass your model and the number, you will get this number of records, which are, as they have IDs. So that means that are put into Mirage database. Okay, and the server create list, it could be put in this scenario default.js file. So it starts on the where your application boots and populates the database. And since the last version, you also get access to the Faker library, which is pretty cool because it provides you with random yet meaningful data, like first names, last names, and some random list generation, and which is pretty important in my opinion. It also gives you the working URLs to to various images. So you can have avatars, you can have some other image content in your application without doing anything more than that. And this is how you call it in your scenario. If you have if you want to do some more data, you create some blog posts which are without author. You then create an author, and then create some more blog posts. But then you can pass the author, so it has the relationship. So it will be under the author if you want to generate that kind of data. And you can, and the same method works in testing. So it's consistent across your development and testing. You use the same tools. And again, you just generate some photos, one line for that, then go to your page and assert that it actually was displayed there. Okay, what else? Let's say that you have two tests. One test looks for the photos. You just want to assert that you have 10 photos on your page if there are 10 photos in the database. So it's just like that. But then we want to also check that if you have some specific photo with specific title, that will also be displayed there. So it's pretty easy to override it. When you call the create, you can pass the second argument, which is just the object with the properties of the model you are creating. And you can override, as you can see that here title is a random photo number, and here the title is sunset over Hyrule. And then you can check if this photo was actually displayed on your application. And beside it, you can also create the 10 generic photos, if you like. And this, all of the elements in the database, they just persist in the scope on this one test. So the database is cleared between the tests. You don't have any lingering data. You don't need to think about it. Each test starts with the clean state. You can also, I won't call it end-to-end testing because you still don't have your backend, but you can assert that the call that your application did actually saved something in database. Because with JavaScript application, you sometimes create a JavaScript object, display it on the page, but it isn't actually saved on your backend. It can happen because there is some error, but it's displayed on the page. So here, you just do some visit page, click edit, update something, save, and then check if it's displayed on the page, but also through the server and the DB property, you can actually check if your Mirage database was updated with this data. So the persistence is in the parentheses, but it's as close as you can get to test if actually the request was made. And you can also test for the error. So again, it's pretty easy to override. Let's say that, assume that you have your in your config file, you have these questions row defined, and on post, it expects to get the object with data to create new question. But if you overwrite it in tests like that, it won't expect it. It will just return whatever you pass it. So here you return the error, and through that you can check that when your application gets the error after saving something, that your front end responds in a correct way, like displaying flash messages or changing style. I'll just like here, see that there was an error. And that could be enough to start, because these tools are just told you about. It's enough to mock your development, to mock your testing, and cover most of the cases. But there's not enough, because it's always good to have more tools, more syntactic sugar, and things that make our work even easier. So there are shorthands. As you see, when you define the contacts route, you say that let's return all contacts, which is the all from the database. And you would have to do that for every of your route, which is also, it's just one line, but if we don't need it, then why to write it? So the shorthand is to do just this get / contacts. And this is the equivalent. And if the collection is different than the name of the route, you can pass it, and it will respond with the users. Same goes with the dynamic routes, when you want the one particular contact, and you want to destroy it. So here, you would have to write 4 lines just for do that in the normal way how it's defined in the config file. But for the shorthand, it's just one line, and you just pass array of the names of which association should be destroyed along with the object. So again, pretty nice abstraction, and you just need to write one line. But it's get better. If you have CRUD, you just need to write one line. This resource contacts, and it will generate all these 6 rows for you. And it's both dynamic with the dynamic segments and index rows. So it's from the version 2.2, which is the newest one. But if you want to use it, then probably you will start with it. Sometimes also, you have the situation that you are developing new feature, but some of your endpoints are already working. You have a backend server somewhere that in development you can start it and get data from a real database, but still you want to use the Mirage for developing new features that don't have backend yet. By default, Mirage would throw an error for every route that isn't defined. So it would throw an error for the route that you have on your server. So you can use the pass-through, which just says to Mirage that, hey, we have this endpoint already, so just let it through, don't throw an error, and the endpoint will respond with whatever payload it will. So you can have, you can write actually every route in this in the config with this pass-through, comment it out, and when the endpoints, real endpoints, are provided by your backend team, you just uncomment it and use it. You can also, as you can see on the bottom, you can also make all the calls to the outside of your domain to be passed through the Mirage as well. And yeah, that will be all. So if you use it, then happy faking.